Hi, I want to welcome you to the Eliminating Caregiver Chaos podcast, where we learn how to navigate our caregiving journey through emotional resilience, through caregiver burnout, because you as caregivers are carrying such a heavy load. So, if you're caring for an aging parent or a loved one, you already know that it's not just the tasks that wear you down. It's all the emotions that pile up inside, one on top of the other, until they eventually spill over into caregiver burnout. But that's what we're all about. That's the whole reason why we started Eliminating Caregiver Chaos. And so I'm your host, DJ Castilleja, and I am a caregiver coach with Eliminating Caregiver Chaos. I also work in grief support, and I have 25 years of hospice and ministry experience. And so in my time, I have just seen caregivers extremely worn out. And this is the place for you if you're experiencing any of those things. Stay tuned. I look forward to having this conversation with you. In this podcast, what I want to talk about is our loved ones' last days. It's like a topic we just don't want to talk about. Who likes talking about death and dying? No one likes talking about it. In fact, it's a conversation that we oftentimes just avoid. And so I want to ask this question to get started. What will your loved one's last days be like? As a caregiver, you probably have thought about it, or maybe you tried to avoid thinking about it. But what will those last days be like? Is it going to be a time of chaos, running around, arguing with family members? Or is it going to be a time of calm and peace? Maybe it's got this real spiritual feel to it. Maybe it's a time of memorial and remembering family and unity. So, what will your loved one's last days be like? I think this is an important question to ask because if we're not looking toward that day, and whether you want to look at it, look forward to it or not, that day is coming. It's not something that we can avoid. And so we can either approach it with initiative, proactively, and head off a lot of the chaos at the end, or we can just respond to every little emergency that happens. And as a result, the end of life can many times just be very chaotic. The end of life, it's like seeing a storm out in the distance. You see the clouds gathering on the horizon, and you may not want to believe that a storm is coming this way, but pretending the sky is clear won't stop the rain from coming. There is a little storm coming ahead, and that might just be an emotional storm, or it may be a storm like wrapping up an estate. But if you're caring for a loved one, that day is coming. And so this storm, we start seeing the clouds on the horizon the moment we realize that our loved one is declining. And it's like the first sign of that dark cloud out in the distance. Here today, I can see outside and I can see gray clouds out there. And for many caregivers, we're already in the midst of the storm. And so if you happen to be listening to this early and you see on the horizon those gray clouds, we know that the end of life and the storm is headed our way. I want you to know that calm does not happen by accident. If you are out in the storm when it starts raining and you're not prepared, you're going to get wet. You're going to get drenched. Preparedness is like having that umbrella or that rain jacket ready to go when those storms finally hit. Chaos happens when we step into the storm with nothing to protect us. And so that's what we want to talk about today is what does it look like at the end of life? What's it going to look like for us? Is it going to be chaos or calm? And so the first thing I want to acknowledge is that you're carrying such emotional weight. I want you to imagine carrying a backpack that's getting heavier every day. Every day you're experiencing more loss. You're experiencing watching your loved ones slowly decline. Maybe they're no longer walking and now they're immobile in a chair, or maybe they're bedbound. And Your backpack is getting heavy not because someone keeps adding huge boulders, but because little pebbles of emotions slowly add up to making that backpack very heavy. Every task, every worry, every appointment that you have, and the moments of grief that you will inevitably experience is just another pebble going into that backpack. Over time, that weight becomes very overwhelming. It becomes heavy to carry. And on top of that, many caregivers are carrying this backpack full of emotions and things you have to do all on your own. And so even thinking about end of life feels like adding a whole big giant rock into that backpack. But when we start thinking ahead to end of life and we start preparing ourselves emotionally and physically with the things that we have around, it actually removes weight later. Because when we don't prepare, we're just opening ourselves up for that last minute chaos when it should really be a time of peace and unity among the family. And so, the very first thing I want to talk about here when it comes to trying to eliminate that chaos at the end, and again, we're all about eliminating caregiver chaos, is having clear and open communication. What does your loved one want at the end of life? Have you ever asked them? Now, I know some of you might be caring for someone where it's a little bit too late to have that type of conversation, but those conversations need to happen, and we need to face those conversations openly and not in a sense of communicating fear, but in a sense that the end of life is natural. It's a natural part of life. And every single one of us is going to experience it at one time or another. That's a fact. No one is still living from 1,000 years ago. We are all headed to aging, decline, and eventually death. And trying to care for someone at the end of life without knowing their wishes is like trying to build a puzzle without the picture on the box. Now, I love puzzles. I frequently go to thrift stores and find a puzzle, and whether it's going to be complete at the end or not, that's what I want to find out. And so when you do a puzzle, many times it comes with this poster or a picture of what the finished product looks like. And so when you're doing the puzzle, you can see what's ahead. You can see the bigger picture. And so you know what you're creating. But in caregiving, if you're not having these conversations, you don't know what you're trying to create at the end. You may not even know that there's options. There's things that you can do. And then as the end comes, every piece of that puzzle just seems confusing because we have no vision of what we want the end of life to look like. When we talk to our loved one, their voice is the picture that helps everything fit. And I know that time and time again, we have caregivers and loved ones, and sometimes they can't have this conversation. Sometimes it may be a little bit too late. It might be, past the point where they're not able to cognitively have that conversation. But if at all possible, even from the very beginning, these conversations need to start happening. We need to be able to ask questions that give shape to this entire journey. And it's as simple as asking your loved one, when those final days come, and they are coming, what do you want the end of life to look like? Who do you want there? How do you foresee it happening? Do you want your favorite music playing? Do you want it to be spiritual? Do you want to be surrounded by your family members? Or do you want to be by yourself? Maybe you want to be watching your favorite show. Ask your loved one what they want for their last days at end of life. And most loved ones feel relieved to be able to show you the picture. Now, maybe there's some family disunity, maybe some resentment, maybe the others may not be really contributing, but still, we should communicate with our loved one what their expectations are and to make it special for them. And not only for them, but for the family members that are present. And so we have to have some idea of what a peaceful moment looks like. When I was a chaplain in hospice, when I would go into someone's room at the end of life, I found it one of my goals to make it as peaceful and as calm as possible. Many times this meant turning off the bright lights that were in the room. Other times I would, put some candles on, or play some like religious or spiritual music that was nice, calm, and peace. And so from the very beginning, even setting the atmosphere can be very important. But I've also seen what chaos looks like. I've seen when they're not prepared. I've been to a home, one of my first chaplain visits, where we had a patient passing away. And when they passed away, it was like the floodgates opened. People started walking into home. I don't know how the word got communicated. People were taking things off the walls. There was arguing. There was yelling. People were taking things from the house, and it was very traumatic for the caregiver to their loved one. And in fact, we even had the police department show up, and it was just chaos. And so the question is what do we want it to look like? Chaos or calm? Chaos is like driving through a thick fog in the middle of the night. You can't see what's ahead. And so everything becomes very tense. You grab the steering wheel and you're trying to see, and every decision feels dangerous. I remember when I was moving to Canada for my first pastoring job, and it had snowed. We were driving through North Dakota, and the roads were icy and slippery, and it was very scary. I was on edge. We would slide back and forth in our vehicle. And that's what it feels like when you're dealing with anxiety and chaos at the end of life. There's no clarity. Okay, every decision feels big. There's a lot of fear, there's pressure, there's panic, and that's just emotional weight that we don't need as caregivers, but it's also emotional weight that we could work on ahead of time. I've seen chaotic end of lives where there's just arguments happening everywhere. Family members just can't get along, and they're yelling at one another right in front of the patient who we're trying to keep peaceful and calm. And then, there's this part where when we don't plan ahead, when we're not thinking ahead, where we just start second guessing every move that we're making, thinking, am I doing it right? Is this what they would want? And so fog happens when no one talks about the last minute. So when we're able to talk and we're able to get clarity, it lifts the fog of the chaos at the end. What does calm look like? It's their wishes, what they would like. The water may still be rough at the end, like the end of life still might be bumpy, but at least it's just rough. It's not like you're completely lost. You make decisions with confidence instead of fear, knowing that this is what they wanted and it's already decided. Maybe you've talked to your family members about what the end of life is going to look like, so that at the last minute, they're not trying to throw in their 2 cents. What we would love to see at the end of life is just families being together, being present in the moment. Because sometimes I've worked with caregivers where they were so busy, focused on other things, that they missed this last moment. They missed the last words with their loved one. And so it's very important that we vision what we want the calm to look like. So how do we start these conversations? And so having these conversations are like gently opening a window in a stuffy room. It brings in fresh air without forcing a rush of wind. And having these type of conversations also create the sense of connection with your loved one. They get to communicate what they're going through, what they're feeling, what their expectations are, and vice versa. You get to share with them. Communication also just brings people together when you're able to talk about these emotional, sensitive things. Okay, you don't slam the window open. It's not something that you just come out and say. No, it's a continuous conversation. You don't talk about everything at once. Just little by little, you gain an understanding of what they want. And so you let that fresh air from that window in gently. And so start with the idea of comfort, not death. Like, where do you want to live? Do you want to live in a room here in this house? Most individuals who are aging and declining want to be in their own home, but that's when you can have that conversation. But like, what happens when I'm not able to care for you anymore? What are we going to do? And so all these types of conversations need to take place because it's just going to provide clarity later on. And I want to say this about the chaos at the end of life. The conversation's important to have, even if your loved one doesn't want to have the conversation. I would feel terrible if my son is trying to talk with me, have a conversation with me about end of life, but then I tell him I don't want to talk about it. And what I'm doing when I deny the conversation is I'm just heaping a load of emotional baggage on him. I'm also creating a chaotic event that he's going to have to go through. I'm going to pass away and die, but he's going to have to be the one that carries everything. And so it's very important if you are someone who's aging and listening to this and you have a caregiver loved one who's caring for you, have the conversation. Give your caregivers, your loved ones, the peace of mind, the calm at the end, because what we want at the end is for everyone to get to experience calm and peace. And so we have to be processing that question. And hospice is usually a big part of that picture. And the hospice staff is required to provide for you grief support, chaplain support, a social worker to help process all these emotions. So please use those resources. Something else that occurs usually at the end of life is many times, I've seen this in hospice over and over again, is that when the patient finally starts declining, easing up in the form of, getting very close to death, the loved one panics, the caregiver panics and sends them to the hospital, creating even more stress and chaos to everything. We have to know that ride in the ambulance is very taxing on our aging loved ones who are near death or who are on hospice. We have seen it many times where if the loved one is comfortable, they live longer. So you tell me what is more comfortable, living your last days in a hospital room where it's sterile, all white, cinder block walls, or being at home in an atmosphere that you're used to, around people that you love, being able to watch the TV shows, hear music that you love. What needs to happen is the conversation of what is the point of where we stop treating your sickness and when we just pursue comfort measures. Because there comes a day that we have to draw that line. When we say that, it's going to cause you more harm to go to the hospital to seek treatments than just to live out your days in peace. And that's a hard conversation to have, but it's a conversation that everyone should have. And look, it's easier said than done, and I totally get it. But these conversations need to take place. End of life is coming no matter what. And so right now, while we're in the planning phases, we can figure out, is it going to be chaos or calm? What types of conversations do I need to have in order to provide peace to our loved one? See, calm is wrapping ourselves up in clarity and support and preparation and emotional protection. As a caregiver, you have great influence on what these last days will look like. And so I just want to encourage you today. I'm going to try to have a little conversation guide available along with this video. And thank you very much. In our Eliminating Caregiver Chaos coaching membership, we have a whole process called the Caregiver Planning Roadmap. I encourage you to check that out. Go to our site, see the available services that we have. www.eliminatingcaregiverchaos.com. And I look forward to talking to you later. Again, think about that conversation. Think about that vision. Because when you have a vision, you gain clarity. What do you want those last days to look like? Chaos or peace? Have a good day.